हेलो, वेलकम टू द स्ट्रीम। गेम चालू करता है। देख, सबसे पहले इधर रोज का फार्म चाहिए। ठीक है। उसका फॉर्म बनाएंगे अपन। उस पर क्या बोलता है? हैंड वाला ही ज़्यादा अच्छा रहेगा आई थिंक। पहले से तो निकल जाती। इधर एक बार फंस गया तो निकलता नहीं है। हैंड वाला उधर फॉर्म बनाता है। सॉरी, इधर रोज फॉर्म। फॉर्म needs to be FK'd in। ऑन करा दो, इधर देखेगा। चलो कैसे भाई, नजर में नहीं घूम रहे। फॉर्म की रिक्वायरमेंट्स देख लेते हैं वर्ड डाउनलोड करके। डाउनलोड दिया है ना। बस सिंगल डायमेंशन फार्म है। पेस्ट विद रोज फार्म। We have the farm over here. इधर रोज फार्म। मेरे को अंडरमाइट चाहिए रहेगी। પોઝિટિવ બધું આવી જાય છે, કટ આવી જાય છે ને, આવી જાય છે. You can build this farm in any portal, but it is much easier if you find the portal. The portal is outside the island. Spawn proof big area. Okay. अंडे चाहिए. एक चिकन स्पॉन करनी है उधर. एक चिकन को लेके जाऊं उधर तो आई गेस अंडे ज़्यादा इजी है. चिकन कम दिखती है. एक संडे पाल के रखी थी इधर एक कोने में. Let's see if she's still there. Yes, she's still there. Giving eggs. Hope. No hope. Check for her. Can breed them. ये रही. Geese. ब्रीड है क्या जेल में? बहुत आसान हो जाएगा काम. The collection is necessary. अरे किधर चली जाती है, चल जल्दी आजा. इनको अपने बाहर टाइप ही रखना है. उसको इधर ले आता हूँ ना. comparatively easier work. तीन गास्टी आ रहा है, और होता तो एक और चाहिए नहीं एक्चुअली, होता नहीं चाहिए। तो होता क्या होता है? सही। ये एक और विटर का सामान रखना है अपने पास, केस वो उड़ना चालू कर देगा सब कुछ। चिप्स तो उठती जाएगी। शॉर्ट सारी ही घास तोड़ दे। तो लगा देता है। Hard time believing I will get chicken 16 eggs. तो चलो जब तक वो हो रहा है अंडा पाक रेडी हो रहा है अपना। घास साफ करते करते ही निकल लेना है। Are you ready? Not yet. Then keep the seeds. एक स्मूथ स्टोन बहुत सारा चाहिए, उसका मुझे आइडिया है। मैं एक शल का बॉक्स भर के स्मूथ स्टोन ले लेता हूँ ऑनलाइन। schematics with the rose farm material list ये आ गया। एंडस्टोन नहीं चाहिए, एंडस्टोन इधर ही पड़ा हुआ है। वाटर बकेट 82 भी नहीं चाहिए। 24 वाइट कारपेट ले आते हैं। एक स्मूथ स्टोन स्लैब उधर ही एट द टाइम बना लेंगे। 2 स्प्रूस ट्रैपडोर इधर ही पड़ा है कहीं पे। बना लेना अच्छा होगा। आई थिंक कॉबलस्टोन की वॉल और एक स्टोन का कुछ था, देख लेते हैं क्या क्या बना लेते हैं दोनों में। एंड ऑल्सो 20 या 24 कारपेट मांगी थी। एक स्टैक कारपेट ले लो। और क्या क्या चाहिए? वाटर बकेट नहीं चाहिए, ये भी नहीं चाहिए। इग्नोर इग्नोर। बेड रॉक को भी इग्नोर। 8 चेस्ट 4 हॉपर, 2 एन्चेंटिंग टेबल, एक कॉबल स्टोन वॉल, स्टोन का कुछ भी नहीं। कॉबल स्टोन वॉल, स्टोन का कुछ भी नहीं है। दो आयरन के बाहर रख लेते, तो आयरन के बाहर रख ही लेते। ठीक है, 2 एन्चेंटिंग टेबल, बताओ फिर चाहिए एन्चेंटिंग के टेबल के। इधर वाला लेक एक्चुअली नट रहा है। हाँ, 4 5 6 7 8। बुक से आसान नहीं मुझे। ये ब्रश है। 2 एन्चेंटिंग टेबल डन। अब क्या क्या बचा? डन 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 डन, नहीं चाहिए। एक स्मूथ स्टोन स्लैब, चिकन स्पॉन करनी है उधर। एक आध स्टैक अंडे चाहिए रहेंगे भाई, तो 16 नहीं, 30-32 ऐसा। देख आई गेस उधर, इधर ये 4 के 8 या 16 कर देता तो निकल जाता है AFK करने। प्लेटफॉर्म बनाने के लिए निकल जाते, इधर एक बंदा AFK करने के लिए छोड़ देंगे। इधर स्पॉन कराने से पहले इधर एक डालना है। बेस्ट प्लेयर कौन सा है उधर? क्या कोई भी नहीं है बेस्ट प्लेयर? कौन? नेक्स्ट ऑन द गेम, जाओ बाबू अंदर जाओ। एक और अंडा है, फोड़ के देखते हैं। आ गया भाई। ओके, एक चीज़ भूल गया है जो अपन ने नहीं करी। एक माइन कार्ड चाहिए, एक रेल। ब्रेक द पोर्टल, यू विल नीड 1। ओके, 907 बिल्डिंग ब्लॉक्स है, 28 कारपेट है, 16 अंडे एप्पल्स उधर से मिल जाएंगे, 16 अंडे बनाने की कोशिश है, 9 ग्लास, खुला ग्लास, 8 चेस्ट, 4 हॉपर, ना 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 ना। बड़े हुए डिलीट कर दिए। ओके, और क्या चाहिए? हॉपर और चेस्ट हो गया, 4 सोल सेंट, 3 इधर स्केलेटन हेड, ये भी हो गया, 2 ट्रैपडोर, एक स्लैब, स्लैब उधर बना लेंगे, एक माइन कार्ट, एक रेल, एक आयरन बार, 2 या 3 रेल चाहिए होंगी, लेकिन आई अप्रिशिएट द एफर्ट, मैं एक रेल लेके चलता हूँ। अरे 3-4 लेके चलता हूँ, 9 लेके चल रहा हूँ मतलब मैं। चार ऐसे फेंकने से अच्छा उनका एक टेबल बना लेता। चेस्ट, ग्लास, ये वो डाल दे। ये कब का है? You cannot set your spawn point. और क्या क्या चाहिए? एक रेड मशरूम, एक डर्ट, 10 बोन मील, एक नेम टैग और 2 स्टैक स्कैफोल्डिंग्स। I have no scaffolding or am I missing them? फिर आपस में देख लो किसको किसके साथ क्या करना, मुझे मतलब नहीं। एक रेड मशरूम ले आते इधर से। टू लिफ्ट स्टेप यार, अब पोर्टल तो एंड क्रिस्टल बनाता है, एक और एंड पोर्टल खुलवाता है, उसमें जाके ये सब करता है। आई ऑफेंडर चाहिए 4 4 ब्लेड पाउडर ले लो। 1 2 3 4 ब्लेजर पाउडर। एक स्टेप इधर से कांच ही उठा लाता है ना, इधर उधर फेंक रहा। सबकी बोतल बना दी थी, सबकी बोतल बना दी थी। कोई नहीं, नया खरीद लो। इसमें से चला कुछ टैक अपने पास, बाकी रखो तुम। इधर नहीं होगा। अच्छा, इसको स्कैफोल्डिंग किस चीज़ के लिए चाहिए? ओके, 128 ब्लॉक ऊपर जाने के लिए एक्चुअली बम्बू ही लेके चलता हूँ ना। 128 क्वालिटी भी रिक्वायर इस नीचे से एक बार तोड़ने पे टूट जाए पूरा ऊपर तक। I think this is more than 2 stacks. बस 128 चाहिए था, 2 स्टैक है मतलब 128। दो स्टैक बैम्बू, एक ये रख ले, एक ये भी रख ले। अयो फंडर इधर एक आई ऑफ अंडर हो ना तो काम हो जाएगा, नेदर में जाना पड़ेगा एक आई ऑफ अंडर के लिए। मिल जाएगी। ओके, वी हैव टू गो इनटू नेदर। ये क्या पिंग? मैं जो दूसरे फार्म बनाना चाह रहा हूँ मैं, उसके लिए एसेंशियल पड़ रहा है। इधर केरोस इधर जाएगा, इधर कोई छन में स्पॉन होती है भाई लास्ट। ये रही ना। ऐसा अपने को मिला गश्त। ओ वाह, दो मिल गए। दो मिलता है या एक पड़ा हुआ मिल गया? आई मीन काफ़ी सारी गश्त तो मारी है। क्या दो उधर भी मारी होगी अपनी? चार एंड क्रिस्टल। अच्छा ये नहीं करना था। गोल्डन एप्पल ले लेना चाहिए। और एप्पल, गोल्डन एप्पल। एक कोई एक बड़ा हो जाएगा। ये चार में से एक भी निकली तो अगली नहीं निकली। आइडिया था मुझे नहीं निकलेगी। ओके उल्टा चल गया। यस। इसको कुछ हुआ नहीं होता है, ये तो स्टार्टअप कर रही होती है ये मशीन। Now that's some significant amount of paper. जय जय नाम यीशु नाम, जय जय नाम यीशु नाम, जय नाम यीशु नाम की जय। नन्नारे नाननारे, नन्नारे नाननारे, नन्नारे नाननारे नाननारे। La 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 la. Move from butter history. La 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 la.
Changed the destiny of nations forever. Esau, the firstborn hunter, heir to everything, returned from the wilderness starving, desperate, dying. His brother Jacob stirred red lentils, knowing exactly what price he would demand. Give me your birthright or die. But here's what will shock you about this trade. It wasn't just inheritance sold that day, it was God's covenant itself. And the most terrifying part? God had already chosen his favorite before birth. He loved Jacob, but Esau he hated. What happened next will shatter everything you think you know about divine justice. Rebekah's screams shattered the desert silence like breaking stone. Her hands clawed at her thighs as the first child tore his way into the world, and what emerged defied everything she had expected. The boy was covered in red hair, thick, coarse hair that made him look more beast than human. But that wasn't the strangest part. The second child came immediately after, his tiny fist locked around his brother's heel like a trap that wouldn't release. Picture this moment. Two babies, born within minutes of each other, but the second one refused to let the first escape into the world alone. The midwife stared at the red, hairy infant and declared what everyone could see. This is not a man, this is a wild man. They named the first child Esau, meaning red, because his skin and hair carried the color of freshly turned earth. The name would prove prophetic in ways none of them could imagine. The second boy they called Jacob, meaning he grasps the heel. But the name carried a darker edge. It also meant he deceives. Think about that. From the moment of birth, one child was marked by wildness, the other by cunning. Isaac looked at his twin sons and laughed, not the joy of a father, but something deeper and more complex. He saw in Esau everything he admired: strength, instinct, the promise of future hunts in the wilderness. But Rebekah kept her silence, holding close the words God had spoken to her during the pregnancy. Genesis 25:23 records what the Lord had told her. 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. 1 people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. Read that again. The older will serve the younger. God had already chosen his favorite before either child drew breath. Malachias 1:2-3 makes it even clearer. Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. This wasn't a decision made after years of watching their characters develop. This was divine choice, sealed before birth, written into the very fabric of their existence. Esau nursed first, his fists clenched against his mother's breast like he was fighting for survival, even in that moment of comfort. Everything about him spoke of appetite, of taking what he needed without thought or hesitation. Jacob watched and waited, already learning the patience that would define his approach to getting what he wanted. The family settled near Beersheba, where Abraham's wells still flowed with sweet water. Isaac built an altar of smooth stones, and smoke rose straight up into the cloudless sky, a sign of divine favor that seemed to bless their new beginning. But underneath the surface, something else was taking shape. The rivalry that had begun in the womb was beginning to manifest in small, telling ways. At 2 years old, Esau rolled in the dust with a toy bow in his hands, his red hair already growing wild and untamed. He moved like an animal, instinctive and immediate in everything he did. Jacob stayed at the edges, his fingers working through sheep's wool. learning the patient arts that would serve him later. The contrast was stark and deliberate. Isaac blessed both boys at the evening meal, his rough voice echoing through their tent, but his eyes lingered on Esau, the boy who would one day bring him fresh game from the wilderness, who embodied everything Isaac understood about strength and provision. Genesis 25:28 tells us plainly, Isaac loved Esau because he ate of his game, but Rebekah loved Jacob. Think about what this meant. The family was divided from the beginning, father favoring one son, mother favoring the other. But this wasn't just parental preference. This was the playing out of divine election in human relationships, with all the pain and conflict that would follow. Esau slept under the stars whenever he could, dreaming of wild trails and distant prey. Jacob woke early to watch the flocks, learning to count and plan and wait for the right moment. Their rivalry simmered quietly through shared meals and crossed glances over bowls of barley, building toward the moment that would change everything. By age 5, Esau killed his first rabbit, his small hands warm with blood as he carried it home triumphantly. That same year, Rebekah taught Jacob to weave nets, the thread creaking between his patient fingers as he learned that the right trap, properly set, could capture prey that raw strength might miss. The scent of their tent carried the mingled aromas of sour milk and smoked meat at twilight, but underneath lay something else, the tension of a family whose destiny had been written before any of them understood what it meant. The years of quiet rivalry were about to explode into a moment that would reshape two destinies forever. Esau strapped his quiver to his belt at dawn, his feet already hardened against the dry thorns that littered the desert floor. He was 25 now, a man whose reputation as a hunter stretched across the tribal territories. Isaac had grown to depend on the fresh game his eldest son provided, and Esau took pride in being the one who could bring meat to his father's table. But this hunt would be different. For 3 days, Esau crawled through valleys and ravines, his arrows flying uselessly past startled deer and rabbits that seemed to vanish like mirages in the heat. The sun burned the back of his neck until his skin cracked and peeled. Salt from his sweat stung his chapped lips, and his water skin had been empty since the second day. Think about what this meant for a man like Esau. His entire identity was built on his ability to provide, to succeed where others failed, to bring home the impossible catch. But now, for the first time in his adult life, the wilderness had defeated him. Every arrow had missed. Every trap had come up empty. Every trail had led nowhere. The sun was setting on the 3rd day when Esau finally gave up and turned toward home. His hands shook from hunger and exhaustion. His stomach had moved beyond growling into a hollow, grinding ache that made him dizzy with every step. Picture him stumbling through the familiar paths toward the family camp, a man who had never known failure now facing the humiliation of returning empty-handed. He could smell the camp before he saw it, smoke from cooking fires, the familiar scent of roasting grain, and something else that hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. Red lentil stew. The aroma was thick and earthy, rich with herbs and oil, and it seemed to reach into his empty belly and twist his intestines into knots. Jacob had been stirring a large pot over the fire when he heard his brother's unsteady footsteps approaching. He looked up to see Esau swaying at the entrance to their family's section of the camp, his usual confident swagger replaced by the desperate stumble of a man at the end of his strength. "Give me some of that red stuff," Esau gasped, his voice hoarse from 3 days of calling to game that never came. "Give me some of that red stuff to eat." Notice those words. Genesis 25:30 records exactly what Esau said. "Let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted." He couldn't even call it by its proper name, lentil stew. In his desperation, it had become simply that red stuff, the only thing standing between him and collapse. Jacob stopped stirring. His ladle hung motionless in the air as his eyes narrowed. taking in every detail of his brother's condition, the wild hair matted with sweat and dust, the bow hanging loose in trembling hands, the way Esau's legs threatened to give out beneath him. This was the moment Jacob had been unconsciously preparing for his entire life. Esau collapsed onto the packed earth floor of the tent, dust immediately sticking to his sweat-soaked skin. He had enough pride left to wait, expecting his brother to serve him as custom demanded. After all, he was the firstborn, the heir, the one whose hunting normally fed the family. Jacob ladled a small portion into a clay bowl, the ceramic creaking as it absorbed the heat from the stew. He held it just out of Esau's reach. "Sell me your birthright first," Jacob said quietly. The words hung in the air like smoke. Esau stared at his brother, certain he had misheard. The birthright, the double portion of inheritance, the family leadership, the covenant promises that stretched back to Abraham for a bowl of lentils. "Look, I am about to die," Esau said, his voice cracking with exhaustion and disbelief. "What good is the birthright to me?" Think about those words. Hebrews 12:16 calls Esau godless for this moment, describing him as one who for a single meal sold his inheritance rights as the oldest son. But read Genesis 25:32 carefully. Esau truly believed he was dying. In his mind, this wasn't a choice between immediate satisfaction and future blessing. It was a choice between eating now or dying before any inheritance could matter. Jacob crossed his arms, his shadow stretching long across the tent wall in the flickering firelight. He had waited 25 years for this moment, and he wasn't going to let desperation alone seal the deal. He needed something legally binding, something that couldn't be taken back later when Esau's strength returned. Esau let out a weak laugh, thinking his brother was playing some elaborate joke. The idea that Jacob would actually demand the birthright for a meal seemed too absurd to take seriously. But when he looked into Jacob's eyes, he saw no humor there, only cold, calculating patience. "Swear to me first," Jacob repeated slowly, each word deliberate and final. Esau spat into the dry dirt, his saliva mixing with the dust to form a small patch of mud. The gesture was meant to show contempt, but it came out weak and pathetic instead. His body was betraying him, and his brother was taking advantage of every moment of weakness. "I swear it," Esau said, his voice echoing hollow in the tent. "I sell it to you. Now give me food." Genesis 25:33 records it simply, "So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob." But think about what really happened in that moment. With those few words, spoken in desperation and witnessed by no one but his calculating brother, Esau traded away everything that made him the heir of Isaac, the recipient of God's promises, the one through whom the covenant would continue. Jacob immediately filled the bowl to the brim, the hot lentils steaming in the desert air. Esau grabbed it with both hands and began gulping the stew as fast as he could swallow, the thick broth running down his bearded chin and staining his dusty robe. He tore at the bread Jacob offered, shoving chunks into his mouth between spoonfuls of stew, eating like an animal that hadn't seen food in weeks. The transaction was complete. The price of a single meal, the birthright of the firstborn, with all its spiritual and material inheritance, had changed hands forever. Esau licked his fingers clean, scraping every last trace of the red stew from the clay bowl until it gleamed under the flickering oil lamp. The taste of lentils and herbs still coated his mouth, but already the satisfaction was fading into something else, a hollow realization of what had just transpired. He pushed himself up slowly, his full belly pressing against his dirty tunic, and walked toward the tent opening without meeting Jacob's eyes. Think about that moment. Esau had just sold his birthright, the most valuable possession a man could inherit, for a single meal. But as he stepped into the cool night air, his hunger satisfied and his strength returning, the magnitude of what he had done hadn't yet settled in. Genesis 25:34 puts it bluntly, "Then Jacob gave Esau bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank, and then got up and left. So Esau despised his birthright." He despised his birthright. Read that again. This wasn't a man filled with regret or desperate to undo what he had done. This was a man who treated the most sacred inheritance in his family as something worthless, something to be discarded for immediate gratification. His footsteps were heavy in the cold sand as he walked away from the tent, leaving Jacob to clean up the evidence of the transaction that would reshape their family forever. Jacob stored the empty pot carefully, his hands still warm from the steam that had risen from the stew. While Esau stumbled toward his sleeping place, Jacob remained awake, his mind working through the implications of what had just occurred. The night fell hard across the desert, stars piercing the black sky like scattered jewels. Esau collapsed onto his bedroll and slept the deep, dreamless sleep of a man whose immediate needs had been met. In his dreams, hunger and hunting mixed together in confused images, successful kills blending with the memory of desperate starvation, the taste of fresh game mingling with the earthy flavor of red lentils. But Jacob stayed awake until dawn, his eyes fixed on the sheep moving restlessly in their pens. He wasn't counting them, he was calculating. The birthright was his now, legally obtained through Esau's own oath. But having it and claiming it were two different things. Isaac still favored Esau. The family still expected the hairy hunter to inherit the covenant promises. Jacob had won a legal victory, but the practical implications remained to be worked out. When morning broke across the camp, Isaac called for his eldest son, his voice weak, but carrying the authority of a father who expected immediate obedience. "My son," he said when Esau appeared at his tent entrance, "bring me some wild game." Esau nodded without hesitation, slinging his bow across his shoulder as if the previous night had never happened. This was what he understood, the familiar rhythm of hunt and provision, the straightforward relationship between effort and reward. He left camp before the sun had fully risen, already focused on the trail ahead and the promise of successful hunting. For hours, Esau tracked a young deer through rocky terrain, his earlier failures forgotten in the concentration required for the hunt. When his arrow finally found its mark, piercing the animal's neck cleanly, he felt the surge of satisfaction that always accompanied a successful kill. This was who he was, not a man who sold birthrights for soup, but a hunter who could bring down game when his family needed it. He dragged the carcass back to camp, its blood tracing a red line in the dirt behind him, marking his path like a signature of competence. At the well, he skinned the deer with practiced efficiency, his knife cutting through tendons and sinew with the skill of years of experience. The familiar work steadied him, reminding him of his value, his purpose, his place in the family structure. Picture Esau entering Isaac's tent with the steaming plate of venison, the rich aroma filling the enclosed space. Isaac's eyes were nearly closed with age and fatigue, but his nostrils flared as he caught the scent of fresh game prepared exactly as he preferred it. "Ah," Isaac murmured, his voice carrying deep satisfaction, "the smell that feeds my soul." Esau seasoned the meat carefully with salt and dried herbs, watching the sweet-scented steam rise from the plate. This was the relationship he understood with his father, provision and appreciation, effort and reward. Outside the tent, Jacob listened to the familiar sounds of preparation and consumption, his fists clenching unconsciously in the wool fabric of the tent wall. Think about what Jacob was hearing. The sounds of Esau maintaining his position as the favored son, the one who brought joy to Isaac's heart through the simple act of hunting. Despite the legal transaction of the previous night, nothing had actually changed in the family dynamics. Isaac still called for Esau. Esau still provided. The birthright might belong to Jacob on paper, But in practice, everything remained exactly as it had been for 25 years. Esau stepped outside to wash his hands in the nearby stream, the cold water biting his skin and washing away the blood and grease from the preparation. When he returned, the family gathered for the meal in relative silence, the scraping of knives against bones the only sound breaking the desert quiet. Esau chewed slowly, savoring the succulent meat that filled his mouth, completely absorbed in the present moment of satisfaction. The venison was perfect, tender, properly seasoned, carrying the wild flavor that spoke of successful hunting and skilled preparation. This was his world, his competence, his contribution to the family's survival and prosperity. But in that silence, something unspoken hung in the air. The knowledge that while Esau could still hunt and provide, while Isaac still favored him and appreciated his gifts, the legal foundation of his position had shifted forever. The years had not been kind to Isaac. Now in his dotage, he coughed dryly from his bed of animal skins, each breath a labor that seemed to rattle his fragile bones. Age had settled on him like a heavy shroud, dimming his once sharp eyes until the world became a blur of shadows and familiar voices. The robust man who had once dug wells and negotiated with kings was now confined to his tent, dependent on others for the most basic needs. Think about what this meant for the family dynamics. Isaac's blindness had progressed to the point where he could no longer distinguish between his sons by sight alone. He relied entirely on the voice, touch and scent to identify the people around him. This growing dependence would prove to be the crucial weakness that would make the coming deception possible. But Isaac's appetite for one thing remained unchanged, his craving for the wild game that only Esau could provide. On this particular morning, as sunlight filtered weakly through the tent flaps, Isaac called for a servant and wheezed out his request. "Go to the flock and bring me a fresh young goat." His voice carried the authority of a patriarch who still expected his wishes to be carried out immediately, despite his physical frailty. Genesis 27:2-4 records Isaac's words to Esau. "I am now an old man and don't know the day of my death. Now then, get your equipment, your quiver and bow, and go out to the open country to hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die." Read that carefully. This wasn't just a request for a meal. Isaac was preparing to give his final blessing, the formal transfer of the covenant promises that would determine which son would inherit the spiritual and material legacy of Abraham. The blessing could only be given once, and it could not be revoked once spoken. Everything hung on this single moment. Esau nodded when the message reached him, gathering his net and heading out into the midday sun without question. This was the rhythm that had sustained their relationship for decades. Isaac's desires, Esau's immediate compliance, the satisfaction that came from providing exactly what his father wanted. The sun beat down mercilessly as Esau made his way to the rocky valley where the goats grazed, their bleating echoing off the stone walls like a chorus of the doomed. He selected a young kid, its meat tender and sweet, and dispatched it quickly with a practiced twist of the neck in his snare. The animal went limp immediately, its eyes glazing over as life fled from its body. Esau dragged it back to camp, its hooves scratching against the rough stones of the path, leaving small gouges in the earth that would mark his passage. In the family courtyard, he skinned the carcass with efficient movements, the moist hide peeling away in strips that he piled carefully to one side. The knife moved through muscle and sinew with the precision of decades of practice, separating the choice cuts that would please Isaac's refined palate. Picture this moment. Esau worked with the unconscious competence of a man who had performed this task hundreds of times. The knife moved smoothly through the meat, cutting it into precise strips that would cook evenly and please his father's aging palate. Blood stained his hands and forearms, but he paid no attention to the mess. This was his domain, his expertise, his unquestioned role in the family structure. He had no reason to suspect that anything had changed, no warning that his birthright sale years earlier was about to be leveraged into something far more devastating. But inside the family tent, Rebecca had heard the door creak as Esau entered the preparation area. Her eyes glittered with the calculating light of opportunity recognized and seized. She had been waiting for exactly this moment, when Isaac would call for his blessing meal, when Esau would be occupied with preparation, when the timing would be perfect for the plan she had been nurturing for years. Think about Rebecca's position. She had received a prophecy before her sons were born that the older would serve the younger. She had watched Isaac's obvious favoritism toward Esau develop over the years, knowing that natural succession would give the covenant blessing to the wrong son. Now, with Isaac preparing to formalize that succession, she saw her last chance to ensure that God's will would be accomplished. She moved quickly to where the fresh goat skins lay, still warm and rough to the touch, and called quietly for Jacob. "Listen to what your father has said to Esau," she whispered when he appeared in the doorway, her voice urgent with the knowledge that time was running out. Jacob entered slowly, his voice trembling with the weight of what he sensed was coming. "What do you want, mother?" Think about that tremor in his voice. Genesis 27:11-12 records Jacob's immediate concern. "But my brother Esau is a hairy man, while I have smooth skin. What if my father touches me? I would appear to be tricking him and would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing." Jacob understood the magnitude of what his mother was proposing, and unlike his impulsive brother, he thought through consequences before acting. But Rebecca had thought through the consequences too, and she had decided the risk was worth taking. Her hands moved sharply as she explained the plan, gesturing with the precision of someone who had worked out every detail. She had watched Isaac's blindness deepen, had noted exactly how he recognized his sons, had calculated the perfect moment to strike. "Your father has told Esau to bring him game and prepare it so that he can bless him before he dies," she explained rapidly. "Now, listen to me and do exactly what I tell you. Go to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats so I can prepare them as your father likes. Then take it to your father so that he may bless you before he dies." Jacob hesitated, running his hand over his smooth arm and thinking of Esau's thick, coarse hair. The contrast between the brothers had only become more pronounced with age, Esau growing more rugged and wild-looking, Jacob remaining smooth-skinned and careful in his appearance. How could such an obvious deception possibly work? Genesis 27:13 records Rebekah's response to Jacob's fears. "My son, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say. Go and get them for me." She was willing to take the spiritual consequences of the deception onto herself. So determined was she to see God's prophecy fulfilled. Rebecca was already wrapping the goat skins around Jacob's arms and neck, the smell of raw animal hide rising thick and pungent in the enclosed space. The skins were still warm from the body heat of the freshly killed animal, and they adhered to Jacob's skin with the sticky wetness of recent death. She adjusted them carefully, making sure they covered all the smooth skin that might give him away under Isaac's touch. Romans 9:11-13 reminds us that this deception was taking place within the context of divine election. Yet, before the twins were born, or had done anything good or bad, in order that God's purpose in election might stand, not by works, but by him who calls, she was told, "The older will serve the younger." Just as it is written, "Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated." Think about that. This moment of human scheming and family betrayal was unfolding exactly as God had predetermined before either child was born. Rebecca prepared bread and a savory stew from the goat meat, the aroma filling the tent with the rich scent of properly seasoned game. She balanced the plate carefully on a wooden tray, adding a cup of wine to complete the meal that would accompany the most important blessing Isaac would ever give. This wasn't just dinner, this was the ceremonial meal that would determine which son inherited the covenant promises that stretched back to Abraham. Jacob took the tray with hands that shook slightly, feeling the weight of more than just food and dishes. Each step toward his father's tent carried him further from the safety of his usual role as the quiet, careful brother, and closer to a deception that would either secure his future or destroy him entirely. His feet moved lightly across the packed earth, every sense alert for any sign that Esau might be returning from his own preparation. The timing had to be perfect, arrive after Isaac had begun expecting the meal, but before Esau could complete his own cooking and present the real offering. As Jacob approached Isaac's tent, he heard his father's weak voice calling out, "Who is that approaching?" This was the moment of no return. Jacob's mouth went dry as he prepared to speak the lie that would change everything. The goat skins felt heavy and foreign on his arms. The tray seemed to grow heavier with each second, and the sound of his own heartbeat thundered in his ears. "I am Esau, your firstborn," Jacob said, his voice carefully modulated to sound stronger and more confident than he felt. The words hung in the air like an accusation. And somewhere in the distance, the real Esau continued his own preparations, completely unaware that his identity was being stolen along with his blessing. Jacob approached with the tray, the false scent of venison filling the dark air of Isaac's tent. The aroma was rich and earthy, carefully prepared to match exactly what Isaac expected from Esau's hunting. But something was wrong, and Isaac's experienced nose caught the discrepancy immediately. Isaac sniffed slowly, his nostrils flaring as he tried to process what his senses were telling him. His brow furrowed with confusion and suspicion. "The smell is that of Esau," he said carefully, "but the voice is Jacob's voice." Think about that moment. Isaac's blindness had made him dependent on his other senses, and those senses were now in conflict. The smell was right, the wild game, the outdoor sense that always clung to Esau's clothes. But the voice was wrong. Too careful, too measured, lacking the rough confidence that characterized his firstborn son's speech. Isaac had lived with his sons for decades. He knew the difference between Jacob's precise diction and Esau's rougher, more direct way of speaking. Jacob's voice carried the careful modulation of someone who thought before speaking, while Esau's voice held the immediacy of a man who said what he meant without artifice. Now Isaac was hearing Jacob's voice claiming to be Esau, and the contradiction sent alarm bells through his mind. Jacob's heart pounded as he heard the doubt in his father's voice, but he had committed to this deception completely. There was no turning back now. Either he would succeed in claiming the blessing, or he would face the terrible consequences of a failed deception. "The Lord your God gave me success," he replied firmly, using the name of God to reinforce his life. Genesis 27:20 records his exact words, "The Lord your God gave me success." Notice how he invoked divine blessing to explain his supposedly quick return from the hunt. The irony was bitter and profound. Jacob was claiming that God had blessed him with success in a deception that was tearing his family apart. But in the larger context of divine election, perhaps there was a deeper truth at work. God's predetermined plan unfolding through human scheme and family betrayal. Romans 9:11 reminds us God's purpose in election was established not by works but by him who calls. Isaac's suspicion deepened at Jacob's explanation. Esau was an experienced hunter, but even he had never returned from a hunt this quickly, with game prepared so perfectly. The timing seemed impossible unless divine intervention had truly been involved. "Come near so I can touch you, my son," Isaac said, "to know whether you really are my son Esau or not." This was the moment of greatest danger. Isaac stretched out his trembling hands, reaching for the figure standing before him. His fingers made contact with Jacob's arms, now covered in the rough, hairy goat skins that Rebekah had so carefully arranged. He ran his hands along the texture, feeling the coarse hair that seemed so familiar, so unmistakably like Esau's natural covering. The goat skins were perfect. They had the right texture, the right thickness, even the right slightly oily feel that characterized Esau's naturally hairy arms. Rebecca had chosen well. The skins were fresh enough to feel natural, but had been prepared carefully enough to adhere properly to Jacob's smooth skin. Isaac's hands moved from Jacob's arms to his neck, then to his face, feeling the artificial hair that covered every area that might give away the deception. The tactile examination was thorough. Isaac was not a man to be easily fooled despite his blindness, but the goat skins passed every test his fingers could devise. "Yes," Isaac said, his voice carrying relief and certainty. "You are my son Esau." Read that again. The deception had worked. Isaac's hands had confirmed what his nose suggested and overruled what his ears had questioned. The sense of touch, which he had come to rely on most heavily in his blindness, had convinced him that his rough, hairy firstborn stood before him. Genesis 27:22 records the moment. "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau." Isaac had identified the contradiction, but chosen to trust touch over sound. In that choice, the entire future of the covenant promises hung in the balance. Jacob began serving the meal, his knife cutting through the tender meat with practiced motions that mimicked Esau's confident handling of food. Every movement had to be perfect, every gesture consistent with the identity he was claiming. The meat fell away in clean slices, the juices running clear and appetizing in the flickering lamplight. He had watched Esau prepare countless meals
Now let's go
over
to
the
end
years,
and
noting how his brother moved with unconscious efficiency around food preparation. Now Jacob called upon those observations, making sure his movements carried the same casual competence that Isaac would expect from Esau. Isaac ate slowly, the way an old man eats when food has become more about ritual than sustenance. The savory juices ran down his wrinkled chin, staining his beard with the evidence of his satisfaction. He drank the red wine from a clay cup, his lips becoming stained with the dark liquid as he savored each sip. The meal progressed in careful silence, Jacob afraid to speak more than necessary, lest his voice again give him away. Isaac chewed thoughtfully, and while the meat was good, Rebecca was an excellent cook. Something about it lacked the authentic wildness that usually characterized Esau's game. But Isaac attributed the difference to his aging palate rather than to any deception. Picture what was happening outside the tent while this ceremonial meal progressed. Esau was still working over his own cooking fire, carefully preparing the real wild game that Isaac had requested, completely unaware that his blessing was being stolen with every bite his father took. The timing was perfect, too perfect to be mere coincidence. Esau worked with the satisfaction of a man fulfilling his role perfectly. He had successfully hunted fresh game. He was preparing it exactly as Isaac preferred, and soon he would receive the blessing that would formalize his position as heir to the covenant promises. He had no reason to suspect that anything was amiss. No warning that his entire future was being redirected in the tent just yards away from where he worked. When Isaac had finished eating, he called Jacob closer. "Come here, my son, and kiss me," he said, his voice warm with the affection he reserved for Esau. This was perhaps the most dangerous moment of the entire deception. A kiss meant close contact, the chance for Isaac to detect any detail that might give Jacob away. The artificial texture of the goat skins, the wrong scent beneath the outdoor smells, the subtle differences in bone structure, any of these could expose the fraud. But Jacob had no choice. He leaned in and kissed his father's neck. The scent of the outdoors that clung to Esau's clothes now transferred to the goat skins, mixing with the familiar smell of the tent. He held his breath, waiting to see if this final test would expose him. Isaac breathed in deeply, and what he smelled satisfied him completely. Genesis 27:27 records what happened next. When Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him. The blessing that followed would change the course of history. "Ah, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. The blessing that followed was comprehensive and irrevocable. Isaac's voice strengthened as he pronounced words that would shape the future of nations. May God give you heaven's dew and earth's richness, an abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and peoples bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed. Think about those words. Be Lord over your brothers. Isaac was formally declaring that the son he believed to be Esau would have authority over Jacob. But the son receiving the blessing was actually Jacob himself, creating a prophetic irony that defined the relationship. The blessing included material prosperity, the dew of heaven and the richness of earth, abundance of grain and wine. It included political dominance, nations serving and peoples bowing down. It included family authority, lordship over brothers. It included divine protection, curses on those who cursed him. Everything that should have belonged to Esau by right of birth had just been transferred to Jacob through deception. The blessing was complete, irrevocable, and comprehensive. In that ancient culture, once a father's blessing was pronounced, it could not be taken back, could not be modified, could not be transferred to another. What was done, sealed by divine witness and human authority. Jacob left quickly, the goatskin still wrapped around his arms, his heart racing with the magnitude of what he had accomplished. He had stolen more than a blessing. He had redirected the entire covenant line, ensuring that the promises made to Abraham and Isaac would flow through him rather than through his brother. But his escape came just in time. Genesis 27:30 tells us,
How?
as soon as Isaac finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob had scarcely gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, Esau his brother came in from his hunting. The timing was so precise, it seemed orchestrated by an invisible hand. Esau was returning from his hunting expedition, his bow slung across his sweat-stained shoulder, satisfied with the success of his hunt. He entered the cooking area with the confidence of a man who provided exactly what his father wanted, carrying a plate of perfectly prepared venison in his experienced hands. The real game smelled different from Jacob's substitute, wilder, more authentic, carrying the genuine scent of the wilderness that no domestic goat could replicate. Esau had taken special care with the preparation, knowing that this meal would accompany his father's final meal. He had seasoned it with wild herbs he had gathered during the hunt, cooked it over a fire of aromatic wood, prepared it with the loving attention of a son eager to honor his father. He entered Isaac's tent, expecting the warm reception that always greeted his successful hunts. "Sit up, my father," he said, his voice carrying the easy confidence of the favored son, "and eat some of my game, so that you may give me your blessing." The words echoed with expectation. Esau had been preparing for his entire life, the full reception of the blessing that would make him the heir of the covenant, the inheritor of the promises, the one through whom God's plan would continue. Isaac chewed the authentic venison slowly, his aged palate noting the difference immediately. This was the real thing, the wild flavor he had been craving, prepared with the skill that only Esau possessed. His voice was weak, but satisfied as he said, "Help me sit up to eat." The genuine affection in his tone showed how much he had been looking forward to this moment. But confusion began to creep into Isaac's expression as he tasted the meat. This venison was different from what he had eaten earlier, more complex, more genuinely wild, carrying flavors that spoke of forests and streams rather than domestic preparation. How could Esau have brought him two different meals? Esau helped his father and served him with generous portion. Isaac swallowed the meal, his stomach was that day. The authentic game satisfied him in a way that the substitute meal had not, and he felt the contentment that came from eating exactly what he had been craving. Then came the moment that would shatter Esau's world. "Now give me your blessing, my father," Esau said, his voice echoed with anticipation and filial devotion. He had fulfilled his part of the bargain perfectly, brought the game, prepared it expertly, served it with love. Now he expected to receive what had been promised. But Isaac began to tremble violently, his hands shaking as the horrible realization crashed over him. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Think about the terror in those words. Isaac suddenly understood that he had been deceived, that he had given away the most precious thing he had to give to the wrong son. The blessing could not be taken away, could not be transferred, could not be undone. What was done? He was still confident because he had no idea what had transpired. Your firstborn, Esau. Genesis 27:33 describes violently. Picture that. An old man, already frail, now shaking with the shock of realizing the deception that had just occurred. His favorite son, the one he had intended to bless, was standing before him, but the blessing had already been given to someone else. The words hung in the air like an accusation, and Isaac knew that everything had changed forever. Isaac's face drained of all color, his hands falling limp to his empty lap, as the full horror of what had happened crashed over him like a collapsing wall. His voice came out as a hoarse shout that seemed to tear from his throat. "Who was it then that hunted game and brought it to me? I ate it just before you came, and I blessed him, and indeed he will be blessed." Think about it. Isaac realized he had been completely deceived, that he had given away the most precious inheritance he possessed to the wrong son. But more than that, he understood that the blessing, once given, could never be revoked. The words, "indeed he will be blessed," carried the weight of divine finality. What was done, sealed by God himself. Esau let out a sound that was barely human, a howl of anguish and rage that made the tenderloins tremble. Genesis 27:34 describes it as an exceedingly great and bitter cry. Picture that moment. A man who had spent his entire life assuming his position was secure, his inheritance guaranteed, suddenly discovering that everything had been stolen from him through deception. He tore his tunic open at the chest, exposing the thick red hair that covered his torso, his hands clawing at the fabric as if he could tear away the reality of what had just happened. His massive frame collapsed to his knees, and dust immediately clung to his sweat-dampened thighs as he fell forward in despair. The sound of Esau's cry carried across the entire camp. Servants stopped their work, animals grew restless in their pens, and everyone within hearing distance knew that something catastrophic had occurred in Isaac's tent. This wasn't the sound of disappointment or frustration. This was the sound of a man whose entire world had just tried to explain what had happened, his words coming out in broken fragments. "Your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing." The old man's voice carried the weight of his own shock and the terrible knowledge that he had been an unwitting participant. But notice Isaac's choice of words. He didn't say Jacob had stolen the blessing. He said Jacob had taken it. On some level, Isaac understood that this outcome aligned with the divine prophecy given to Rebekah before the twins were born. The older would serve the younger. Perhaps this deception was the means by which God's predetermined plan was being fulfilled. Esau's voice broke as he pleaded with his father, desperation making his words high and strained. "Do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father." Genesis 27:38 tells us that Esau wept aloud as he made this plea. Picture a grown man, a warrior and hunter, reduced to sobbing like a child as he begged for some portion of what he had lost. Think about what Esau was asking. He wasn't requesting a different blessing or a lesser inheritance. He was asking if there was any blessing left at all. In that ancient culture, the father's blessing was not just ceremonial words, but a prophetic declaration that shaped destiny itself. Without it, a son had no assured future, no divine protection, no guarantee of prosperity. Isaac's response was barely above a whisper, his voice heavy with the finality of what he had to say. I have made him lord over you, and all his relatives I have given to him as servants. I have sustained him with grain and new wine. So what can I possibly do for you, my son? Read those words carefully. Isaac had already declared Jacob to be lord over Esau. He had already assigned all the family members as Jacob's servants. He had already pronounced material prosperity upon Jacob. The comprehensive nature of the blessing left nothing significant for Esau to inherit. But Esau wouldn't accept this
नेम टैग रह
finality.
गया भाई.
He continued to weep bitterly, his tears streaming hot down his bearded face as he pressed his father for any crumb of blessing that might remain. The sight of this powerful man broken by grief moved even Isaac's hardened heart. Finally, Isaac found words for a secondary blessing, though it carried none of the richness of what Jacob had received. Genesis 27:39-40 records it. Your dwelling will be away from the earth's richness, away from the dew of heaven above. You will live by the sword, and you will serve your brother. But when you grow restless, you will throw his yoke from off your neck. Notice the stark contrast. Where Jacob received the dew of heaven and the richness of earth, Esau would dwell away from these blessings. Where Jacob would be served by nations, Esau would serve his brother. The blessing was essentially a prophecy of conflict and subordination, with only a distant promise that someday Esau's descendants would break free from Jacob's dominance. Esau absorbed these words like physical blows, each phrase driving home the magnitude of his loss. When the blessing was finished, he picked up his bow from the ground, the bowstring snapping taut between his fingers with a sound like breaking bones. Without another word, he strode out of the tent, his footsteps pounding the sand with the weight of barely controlled fury. He found Jacob at the well where the family drew their daily water, and when their eyes met, Jacob saw something in Esau's gaze that made his blood freeze. This wasn't the quick anger of a moment. This was the cold, calculating hatred of a man planning murder. Esau said nothing to Jacob in that moment, but his thoughts were already forming into a deadly plan. Genesis 27:41 records what he said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are near, then I will kill my brother Jacob." Think about the calculation in those words. Esau wasn't planning to kill Jacob immediately. That would dishonor Isaac and bring shame on the family. But as soon as Isaac died and the period of mourning ended, Esau planned to take his revenge. Jacob would die, and with Jacob's death, perhaps the blessing could somehow revert to its rightful heir. The whispers began immediately. Servants who had witnessed Esau's breakdown, who had seen the murder in his eyes, who had overheard his muttered threats, they began talking among themselves. In a camp that size, news traveled fast, and within hours, the entire community knew that Esau was planning fratricide. Rebekah heard the murmuring voices of the servants, and her face went pale as she pieced together what had happened. She had orchestrated the deception, but she hadn't fully calculated the deadly consequences. Her successful manipulation had saved Jacob's inheritance, but had also marked him for death. She ran to Isaac, her voice urgent with maternal fear. "I'm disgusted with living because of these Hittite women. If Jacob takes a wife from among the women of this land, from Hittite women like these, my life will not be worth living." She was giving Isaac a reason to send Jacob away that had nothing to do with Esau's threats, a way to save Jacob's life without admitting the deadly danger he was in. Isaac understood the subtext immediately. That night, by flickering lamplight, he called Jacob to his tent and gave him direct orders. Do not marry a Canaanite woman. Go at once to Paddan Aram, to the house of your mother's father Bethuel. Take a wife for yourself there, from among the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. Jacob nodded silently, understanding that this wasn't really about finding a wife. This was about staying alive. He gathered his few possessions into a traveling bundle, strapping it to his back as he prepared to flee the only home he had ever known. Somewhere in the darkness beyond the camp, Esau sat sharpening his dagger, the blade gleaming as he worked the whetstone across its edge. The sound of metal against stone carried on the night air like a promise of violence to come. His teeth were clenched as he worked, his jaw muscles standing out like cords beneath his skin. The rage that burned in Esau's heart was no longer the hot fury of the moment. It had cooled into something far more dangerous. This was the methodical anger of a man who had been cheated of everything he valued and who was prepared to wait as long as necessary to claim his revenge. Jacob left at dawn, the dust of the road already clinging to his sandals before the sun had fully risen above the horizon. His bundle was small, just the essentials for a journey that might last months or years. He walked with the purposeful stride of a man who knew that staying meant death, but his shoulders carried the weight of everything he was leaving behind. From a distant ridge, Esau watched his brother's departing figure grow smaller against the vast landscape. His fist was clenched around the shaft of his spear, knuckles white with the force of his grip. Part of him wanted to pursue Jacob immediately, to end this before his brother could escape beyond reach. But Isaac's command had been clear, and even in his rage, Esau wouldn't directly disobey his father's wishes. He turned back to the camp and entered his tent, but the space felt hollow and strange. The wind caught the loose tent flaps and made them snap against the support poles with an irregular rhythm that seemed to mock his solitude. For the first time in his life, Esau was truly alone. Jacob was gone, taking with him not just the blessing, but the familiar dynamic that had defined their entire existence. Isaac's health deteriorated rapidly after Jacob's departure. The shock of the deception, combined with the grief of losing his favored son to exile, seemed to drain what remained of his strength. His dry cough echoed through the camp in the silence that followed, a constant reminder that the family patriarch was fading. Esau began hunting alone, a practice that had once been his greatest joy, but now felt like a hollow ritual. His arrows flew solitary through the air, finding their targets with the same accuracy as always, but the satisfaction had drained out of the activity. There was no Jacob to compete with, no father eager to receive the fruits of his hunt, no family dynamic to fuel his efforts. The game he brought back was eaten in silence, the camp feeling more like a collection of strangers than a unified family. The absence of Jacob's quiet presence had created a void that affected everyone, though none would admit it openly. In an effort to fill the emptiness and perhaps to spite the family that had rejected him, Esau took another wife, Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael. Genesis 28:9 tells us he did this specifically to please Isaac, but there was more to it than family politics. Her tent appeared beside his, bringing foreign customs and unfamiliar sounds to the family compound. Her laughter rang out sharp and frequent in the night, cutting through the desert silence as incense burned in her private fire. The smell was different from anything the family was accustomed to, exotic spices and resins that spoke of traditions far removed from the covenant customs Abraham had established. Isaac, weak as he was, noticed the changes in his camp. "Why have you taken a wife from here?" he asked, his voice barely strong enough to carry his disappointment. Esau shrugged, his eyes shifting away from his father's face. He had no good answer because the truth was complicated. He had married Mahalath partly out of spite, partly out of loneliness, and partly because he was trying to build something new from the ruins of his old expectations. Years passed with grinding slowness. Esau's flocks grew larger as he expanded his operations across the plains, but prosperity felt meaningless without the family structure that should have accompanied it. He branded his cattle with hot iron, watching the black smoke rise from seared flesh, marking his possessions as his own in a world where nothing else seemed to truly belong to him. He built stone shelters for his growing herds, the rhythmic pounding of his hammer against rock providing a soundtrack for his solitary work. Each blow seemed to echo the question that haunted him. What was the point of accumulating wealth and property when the blessing that should have sanctified it all belonged to someone else? His sons began to arrive, Eliphaz first, his cries filling the tent with the promise of a new generation. But even the joy of fatherhood was tinged with the knowledge that these children would inherit a legacy diminished by deception. During these years of separation, Jacob experienced the famous dream at Bethel, seeing angels ascending and descending a ladder to heaven. But when messengers brought news of Jacob's divine encounters to the family camp, Esau ignored them completely. He had no interest in hearing about God's favor toward the brother who had stolen everything from him. Rebekah quietly wasted away during these years, consumed by longing for the son she had helped to save, but whom she would never see again. The guilt of her manipulation and the grief of separation ate at her like a physical disease, though she bore her suffering in silence. Isaac finally died at the age of 180, his body washed gently in warm water according to the customs Abraham had established. Genesis 35:29 records that Isaac breathed his last and died and was gathered to his people, old and full of years. And his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. For the burial, Jacob returned from his exile, and the brothers worked together in grim silence, their shovels cutting through the hard earth of the cave at Machpelah. They dug side by side without speaking, the only sounds being the scrape of metal against stone and the heavy breathing of men engaged in difficult labor. When Isaac's body had been laid to rest beside Abraham and Sarah, Esau stood for a long moment with his hand pressed against the stone that sealed the tomb. His voice came out hoarse and broken as he spoke to the silence. "Where is my portion now?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, carrying all the weight of years of loss and displacement. The question about his lost portion still echoed in the silence around Isaac's tomb, but Esau had no time for prolonged mourning. Within weeks of the burial, he began expanding his operations toward the hill country of Seir, his wagons creaking and groaning as they navigated the rocky mountain trails. The move was both practical and symbolic. He was leaving behind the land of promises that had never been his, and claiming territory where he could build something entirely his own. His children ran naked between the goats, their feet thick with dust from the new terrain. The sight of them filled Esau with a fierce pride that had nothing to do with covenant blessings or divine favor. These were his offspring, produced by his own strength, thriving under his own protection. Genesis 36:4-5 lists the sons born to him. Adah bore Eliphaz to Esau, Basemoth bore Reuel, and Oholibamah bore Jush, Jalam, and Korah. These were the sons of Esau, who were born to him in Canaan. He took yet another wife, Basemoth, her wedding veil falling across the stone altar he had built on a prominent ridge. The marriage ceremony echoed with drums that pounded rhythms foreign to the covenant traditions, and wine flowed freely into cups carved from bone and horn. These were not the careful, measured celebrations of Abraham's line, but wild, exuberant festivals that celebrated the abundance Esau was creating through his own efforts. His flocks grew so large they overflowed the valleys, their bleating mixing with the howling wind that swept down from the mountains. Think about what this represented. While Jacob was serving Laban and building wealth through careful negotiation and divine favor, Esau was accumulating prosperity through raw determination and strategic expansion. He negotiated regularly with Midianite merchants, coins clinking in his calloused hands as he struck deals for livestock, weapons, and exotic goods. The sound of metal against palm became the soundtrack of his success, tangible wealth that no one could steal through deception or claim through blessing. But rumors reached him about Jacob's situation in Paddan Aram, and Esau's eyebrows would furrow whenever traders brought news of his brother's growing prosperity with Laban. The reports stung because they suggested that Jacob was thriving despite, or perhaps because of, the blessing he had stolen. Divine favor seemed to follow the deceiver while Esau had to fight for every advantage. His grandchildren began arriving, their names shouted to the starry sky in celebration. Each new birth represented the expansion of his legacy, proof that his line would continue and prosper, even without the formal blessing that had been stolen from him. These children would know their grandfather as a successful patriarch, not as the man who had been cheated of his inheritance. Esau constructed a watchtower from piled stones, working until his knees ached from kneeling to fit each rock precisely into place. From its height, he could survey the vast territory that had come under his control, watching for threats and opportunities across the landscape he was claiming as his own. He hunted ibex on the steep mountain slopes, their curved horns cutting through the thin air as they leaped from rock to rock. The hunt required all his skill and offered the kind of challenge that reminded him of his fundamental nature. He was a man who took what he needed through strength and cunning.
Okay. I'll be AFK for some time. ओके, एक काम और कर देते हैं खाली, टोड स्कीमेटिक। खाना खाने जा रहा हूँ। टिक भी नहीं है मेरे पास। ये लिए 2 बम्बू है। अरे इधर को तो एंड में स्पॉन करना है। एक सेकेंड। नेम टैग ये रहा, डबल चेक। ओके, ये काम कल करूँगा या तो मैं खुद कर लूँगा? अच्छा, एक थोड़ा सा चेम्बर वेम्बर जैसा बना लेते हैं पहले। ओके। अरे यार लेकिन वो डिस्पॉन हो जाएगी भाई, मेरा सामान लेटर है मेरे पास। ये तो अबे नेम टैग दे दिया, मतलब उसकी चिंता नहीं रिस्पॉन्ड हो जाने की। The farm didn't mention to do I. Exactly as they asked. Exactly as they we pleased. No, not we pleased. I think अब खाली नीचे भीतर स्पॉन करना बाकी है। बाकी का काम कल करते हैं, मेरे को जाना है। अलविदा, हैव अ गुड नाइट।